Hi, everybody. It's 12 o'clock, so we're going to get started. And I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Bill Franz, and I am on the board of directors with the Greater Newburyport Village. There's a little flyer out here on this table that will tell you about the village. So we're your hosts for today. Every third Wednesday, we sponsor this type of meeting. It's called a Village Talk. And so I want to do a 1-minute commercial so you know who we are. So you can time me. I think I've got this down right. So Greater Newburyport Village is a local nonprofit. We are not the senior center. Some people confuse us. Our missions are somewhat similar. So our goal as a nonprofit is to support people in a couple of ways as they age. And the goal is to help people to stay in their homes and in the communities that they love versus maybe going to a nursing home or maybe going to a gated community and paying lots and lots of money. So we do this in two ways. One, we have a core group of volunteers that help our members. So if someone needs some temporary help, like, hey, it's hot and I need to put my air conditioner in the window and I don't know how to, I can't do that. We'll send a volunteer over to do that. Or I need a ride. I need to get to the hospital. Or I need to go see my doctor, and I can't do that driving. So we will do that. The number of tasks that we do vary according to what people's needs are. It could be as many as 30 or 40 different tasks a month, which is what we do on the average for our membership. The second thing that we do is provide social events so that people can get out and see others. You know, as we get older, sometimes our circle of friends gets smaller and smaller, and we stay inside, and isolation is bad. So we have many, many different activities. We have a newsletter that we put out every month. We have trips to museums. We do all sorts of different things. So that's what the Greater Newburyport Village is about. Nobody earns a penny. This is all volunteer work. If you feel like you might like to volunteer, then, you know, I'm going to be down by the door after this wonderful presentation, and we can chat about that. You know, if you feel, gee, I could drive somebody to Anna Jake's Hospital, then that's terrific. We support people who live in Newburyport, Newbury, West Newbury, Amesbury, Salisbury, Rowley, Byfield, just this general area. So that's who we are. Thank you for being here. Joyce is going to introduce our speaker for the day. I'm very excited because my dad was at D-Day. He was at Normandy, and so I'm looking forward to learning more about it. Thank you all for being here.
I'm going to be very brief also because I don't want to take any of Bronson's time, but turn off your phones, absolutely. If you don't know how, get somebody to help you, okay? We thank the Senior Center for this location and having and allowing us to be here and so on. I'm a member of the village. I love the village. I love the village talks. Next month, we're having Cheryl Richardson. She's a great, great speaker. And she's going to talk about something that's a concern to most of us here, maybe not every single person, but how to age wisely. We can always need help with that, right? Okay. So Bronson's a longtime friend, and he has a tremendous love of history. And you know, we referred to him as an amateur historian, but he's so professional in so many ways in his thoroughness and his presentations. I've heard him present on this topic, and so I was very, very glad when Bronson agreed to be with us today. It's a sad, it's a sad situation, but it's also a very triumphant situation, and we have to remember it. So.
Thank you, Joyce, very much for the invitation to come, and I'm thrilled to talk with you. I am, as she says, I'm a history nerd, right? So that's number one, and that's how I got interested in this presentation. And number two, I got interested because my father was in the Normandy invasion. He was in the Navy on Utah Beach, right at the corner of Omaha. And like most members of the greatest generation, I never heard him say a word about his experiences. I knew he was a veteran. He was proud of having served his country and offered his life for his country and for democracy, but he never said a thing about it. I knew that he was in the Normandy invasion because my mother and my aunt told me so. Now, my father was very involved in work. Work was a really big part of his life. I'm going to turn this around so I can actually see you all. And he worked until he was 80, after my mother passed. And at the age of 80, he decided to come to Newburyport, and because he wanted to be near me, his only child, and his 3 grandchildren, one of whom's in the back. And he spent 2 years in senior housing in Newbury, unfortunately had a stroke, and in a hospital, ended up at what used to be Country Manor and is now called something else for the last year and a half of his life. While he was there, I said to him, I would like to interview you about your experiences in World War II, because if I don't know that, I can't pass that on to my children and your grandchildren. And he agreed. So one afternoon, I went over, I prepared a bunch of questions, and we sat on the deck at Country Manor, and I asked him questions. And he told me more than I ever expected to hear. And if I had tried to have a casual conversation with him about it, I would have gotten very, very little information. I had to structure it and make it very formal, because there was a lot of trauma involved in some of his experiences, as you'll hear. And he survived, although you'll hear, almost died. And so I want to talk about him a little bit as part of going over the information about the Normandy invasion, because he was what I call an ordinary hero. He didn't receive any citations for bravery. He didn't get any medals for bravery. He was an ordinary guy who put his life on the line like 4 to 5 million other guys did. And so I know that many of you, how many of you have fathers who were in World War II? How many grandfathers? Yeah, so, I mean, all of those people are ordinary heroes. So when I tell his story, I hope to reflect on your story, and I would love to hear your story, because they're different but similar kinds of things. I also have his dog tags here with me. Okay, so let me begin. This is a picture by Robert Capra, who Life magazine photographer. Remember him? He was the only photographer who was on the boats going into Normandy with some of the first waves of troops. The only photograph. He took hundreds of photographs like this. Unfortunately, due to a processing error, once he got the film, it was old style, 38 millimeter film, all but 11 of the photographs were lost. So this is one of them, and you'll see a few others along the way. They're really incredible. So let's begin a little bit with what was going on before the invasion. So before the invasion at Normandy, as you can see, codenamed Operation Overlord, it brought together 160 land, sea, and air Allied forces in the largest amphibious invasion in history. The D-Day operation required meticulous planning and unprecedented cooperation between the international armed forces of the Allies. It opened a second Western front against Nazi Germany that led to the liberation of France, denying Germany exploitation of all its economic and manpower and weakening the Reich. Historians cite it as the most significant and consequential military campaigns in history, and the beginning of the end of the Second World War. This is just a little bit of a timeline to give a little bit of a context for it. You know, Hitler becomes chancellor in 1933. Germany invades Poland. In 1939, because of their agreement with Poland, Britain and France declare war on Germany. France settled because they were absolutely overwhelmed and invaded. In 1941, Hitler betrays his friend, Stalin, with whom he had a non-aggression pact, and decides to invade the country, which was pretty incredible. It's like the fox getting ahead of the other fox, right? And then in 1941, Pearl Harbor, we all know about that, Japan, and the destruction. And the United States and Britain declare war on Japan, and immediately Germany declares war in the United States, because Germany and Japan had a non-aggression pact. Germany, Japan, and Italy had a non-aggression pact to defend each other. It was a pact of convenience. They could have cared less about it, and Hitler could have cared less about the Japanese. But it became an opportunity to declare war on the United States and weaken it before he launched the Battle of Britain and occupied Britain, which was his next objective on the Western Front. So, on the same day, 2 hours later, the United States declared war in 1941. Now, in 1940, the United States instituted the Selective Training and Service Act of 1940, all men between 21 and 45 to register for the draft. That was the first peacetime draft in U.S. history. Those selected were required to serve at least 1 year, and when World War II ended, they had to stay throughout the duration of the fighting. That is my father's draft dodge. He was in Fairfield, Connecticut. That's where he grew up. And as you can see, he was 21 at the time, barely 21, and he worked for the Bullard Company. He was a machine operator at Bullard, which was a manufacturing, a kind of well-known manufacturing company. I think it's still in existence. And the Bullard was converted to doing military-grade equipment and supporting military-grade parts and equipment. This is what Germany, the height of German occupation in 1941-42. In 1942, approximately 280 million people in Europe, more than half the population, were governed by Germany or their allies in the puppet states. They were very good at setting up puppet states in a variety of different places, which were fascist and Nazi. And I mean, you can see that they clearly had the upper hand. They controlled North Africa. They controlled most of Europe. After they betrayed Stalin, they did a massive push into the Soviet Union. Great Britain was not very far away. Spain was ruled by Franco, also a fascist dictator. He was very sympathetic. He didn't join the war. He didn't need to, and he had a poor economy, but he was very sympathetic and supportive of the Nazis. Turkey was definitely neutral and remained neutral. Sweden had a balancing act between appeasing the Nazis and appeasing the Allies. They had a strong military, but they balanced that act. But, as part of balancing that act, they allowed Germany to transport troops across their borders, both by road and by train, in order to invade Norway to provide a buffer against any Great Britain. On the other hand, they also provided incredible humanitarian aid to all of the Jewish populations of Denmark and Norway and the surrounding areas. So it was a very mixed bag indeed. So France, this is what France looked like. And you can see Germany annexed part of it. Italy they annexed part of it, and they also occupied the other parts. This was a closed zone because Germany wanted to resettle German citizens in it. They refused the return of any French refugees. They wanted it to ultimately a way of have it become a part of the Greater Third Reich. This was the Vichy government here, which was the de facto government, and this was the occupation zone. To keep all of the coastal areas free from any sort of assault by the Allies. Now, the really important thing to maybe notice about this is the Atlantic Wall. So you see that big line going all the way around. That line was a no-go zone for all of the, for anyone. And the Germans used over 2 million prisoners, Jews, Romani, political prisoners, POWs, to build barriers along that entire wall made out of steel, wood, barbed wire, minefields throughout that beach area, and also bunkers and troop rifle enclaves, so that all of it could be defended dramatically. And the Germans believed that because of the Atlantic Wall, see, the Germans had a lot of slave labor. I mean, they had over 280 million people, so they could just use slave labor, and if they died, so what? They had more slave labor. So they created this wall, which they felt was impregnable. There was no way that the Allies could possibly breach it. Operation Deneb, or Operation Jubilee, occurred in 1942. The Allies decided that they were going to show the Germans that it was possible. And Deneb is a deep water harbor. Warfare was conducted through a deep water harbor. You had to get the boats close enough, and then you had to get other boats to get troops off and get everybody out. And so they decided to it was not an invasion of the Western Front. It was a way to show we can go in there, we can gather intelligence from the military that was there, we can capture the town, and then we can retreat and show that this is possible. So it was an experiment on the Allies' part to see how they do it. It was a total and utter disaster. Of all of the men, you can read this, the RAF lost most of its aircraft, the Royal Navy lost most, tanks and infantry were trapped on the beach. Within 10 hours, over half the men who landed were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. Canadians suffered a 68% casualty rate. Complete fiasco, but became a learning experience for the Allies that they had to approach this in a very different way than they had before, because there was no way they were going to win by going in a deep water port. That's my father. He was 22 years old. He joined the Navy. 1943, he went to Finger Lakes. He studied diesel mechanic school. He wanted to become a diesel mechanic. And he was a petty officer. He wanted to work in submarines, but he was assigned to this instead of submarines. And he was shipped to Teignmouth, Devon, which is near Torquay in southern Great Britain. Kind of a pretty nice area, actually. And his job was to escort ships up the English Channel to ensure safe passage of supplies and troops. And he saw some action because during in these convoys, German submarines would attack them, and his boat was attacked. It was damaged, but the boat was never destroyed. There was no loss of life. So we saw some kinds of minor combat with German submarines particularly, and other boats, but no one was killed. He didn't really experience the horrors of things which were to come. And in fact, he was a 22-year-old guy, right, with a bunch of other 22-year-old guys. So on their time off, they would go to Torquay and hang out at the pubs. And when they had their time off, and they had kind of a good time there. He ended up dating 2 women. one of them seriously before he was rearranged. And one of his stories I have to share with you. I had a pet parrot on the ship. It was against the rules, but the skipper looked the other way because it raised crew morale. Everyone loved the parrot. The parrot became everyone's pet. I taught it to whistle at girls, so when we were at the dock, it got me a lot of attention. My crewmates taught it to say some other things, like Hitler's an ass, and my favorite, blow it out your ass. I got into a lot of trouble when the fleet commander came to address our crew, and the parrot was there, and in the middle of one of his talks, he said, blow it out your ass. I had to go before the commanding officer. Everybody thought it was funny, but he had to discipline me because that's what he had to do. So I was restricted to the ship for quite a while, and then everybody just laughed and it was all over. Eventually, unfortunately, the parrot flew away. Now, the Allied leaders met in Tehran because they had to come up with something. They had to plan an invasion. If there was not an invasion in Western Europe, Germany was fighting on the west with Russia, but they had to open a Western front in order to defeat them and to begin to squeeze Germany into submission. So the three met. Stalin joined them. Hitler's old friend Stalin. He doesn't look very happy in this picture, does he? I don't think he was in a very good place. You see Roosevelt and Churchill. And so here were the outcomes. The United States and Britain agreed to open a second front by invading occupied France by May 1944. That was the deadline at that time. Churchill wanted to do an invasion through the Balkans, but he was talked down. They didn't agree with that. France, they thought, was the objective. The USSR agreed to join the United States and Britain in a war against Japan once Nazi Germany was defeated. They had a non-aggression pact, Russia and Japan, prior to that. The US and Britain agreed to Stalin's demand for a westward shift of the Polish border and Soviet domination of Eastern Europe as a price for opening an aggressive military campaign on the Eastern Front. And they did it because they felt like they had no choice. Roosevelt, this I had never heard before until I read it, but Roosevelt considered Britain's colonialism as a greater threat than Soviet communism. He felt that Soviet communism was kind of doomed to fail because it was so economically unviable. But Britain had colonial posts throughout the world, and Roosevelt felt that it was going to result in a lot of worldwide conflict, and he was very concerned about that. The early planning of these people led to early discussions of a need for a United Nations in order to keep peace throughout Europe and the world. Now, as a part of that, they set up the Supreme Headquarter Expeditionary Force. I'll get this a little closer. And there you see it. These were the commanders who were charged with the invasion of France and the invasion of the Western Front. You can see Omar Bradley over far left, some of the British generals, and right at the center, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And Roosevelt felt that Eisenhower was absolutely the best person. Why? Because he was a strategic thinker, he was a brilliant military commander, but he also had diplomatic skills. And diplomatic skills were called for to work with Great Britain and the other allies, as opposed to, let's say, General Patton, who was a brilliant general and a brilliant fighter on the ground, but not noted for his temperate negotiating skills, let's say. So it was a very wise decision by Roosevelt, who was a brilliant guy, to choose Eisenhower. And as I've gotten to hear and see more about Eisenhower, I realize what an absolutely brilliant move this was, and what a brilliant man he was, because General Bernard Montgomery, this guy, was the British commander of forces, and he was a very thorny, difficult, he was noted as tactless and arrogant, and he thought Eisenhower was incompetent to do the job and made no secret about it. He felt Britain had been in the war since 1939. He should be commander of this force. Well, rather than get into a fight with him, Eisenhower found a way to give him advanced responsibilities for the invasion in order to satisfy him that he could be the commander in force of the ground forces. And he found a way to work with him and work around his unhappiness and his tactlessness and his arrogance, so that they ended up forming an alliance, a little unstable, but they formed an alliance which led to communication about what needed to happen in this massive invasion. And again, all to Eisenhower's amazing skills. Now, a couple of things, innovations had to happen because the decision was made not to go into a deep water port. The Germans were convinced that the invasion, they knew an invasion was coming, and they were convinced that it was going to happen in Calais because it's a deep water port, and they thought it would be a massive undertaking, there'd be tremendous slaughter, but they would triumph. There was no question in their mind. The Allies decided to go on the beach and to invade Western Europe and France through the beach. And one of the problems was the English Channel is a very unpredictable tides, and the weather is very unpredictable. So, this British mathematician created special calculations that could reveal tidal patterns, and he identified the exact time period when the D-Day landings should optimally occur between the 5th and the 7th of June. Which was a very unexpected time. The Germans never thought there would be one because the weather was late spring and it was very unstable weather. So he identified that, and another meteorologist, RAF, advised Eisenhower that there was the storm on the 5th. The weather would improve long enough for the invasion to take place the next day. It would calm down enough to take the next day. Now, here's one of my favorite stories. Whoops, sorry, wrong way. This is Maureen Flavin Sweeney. She was the postmistress at a lighthouse at Blacksod in County Mayo, North Ireland. And one of her duties was to make weather observations and report them to Allied headquarters. On her 21st birthday, she made the observation there was a coming storm on June 5th, the date they had originally planned for the invasion. And she delayed that information, and after so, Dr. James Slug recommended that the invasion be postponed by 24 hours. It would not have been perhaps successful had it happened on the 5th. Now, she, for her efforts, at the age of 98, was awarded a U.S. Congressional commendation for her efforts for the war effort. Again, another ordinary hero, right? I mean, without which this wouldn't have happened. The other innovation which really we have to take note of was the Higgins boat. Andrew Higgins was a Louisiana boat designer, and he created a revolutionary flat-bottomed landing craft that enabled amphibious landing in Norway and other beachheads during World War II. He designed the boats with a hinged prow, fall down, disgorge men and equipment, and then immediately back straight out. And the craft changed the nature of warfare, seaside results, which had always required deep water harbors. Now they could be mounted against any shoreline. Eisenhower credited Higgins with winning the war for the Allies. Incredible. Now, Higgins was from Louisiana, and somebody found him. What he did was design boats for people to go fishing in the bayous. And, you know, if you're fishing in the bayous, there's like, you know, logs and trees which have fallen, and there's all kinds of growth and vegetation, and so you can't just use a deep water boat with a bow. He designed this boat that just skimmed across the surface, and it had a propeller inside a case, and if you ran aground, you just backed right up and went out. So they used his design, and he worked with the military organization, not easily. I guess he was a very crusty guy. He walked out a few times on them, but they got him back. And they designed this landing craft for troops, and then they designed a larger landing craft. So what you have to imagine is, if the invasion was taking place on Plum Island, right? Plum Island is 11 miles long. The Normandy beach was 50 miles long, so 5 times what Plum Island. How do you get troops in a boat into Plum Island as quickly as you possibly can, and then get them out so you can get even more in? And that's what this boat allowed them to do. Incredible. There were a lot of other innovations. We don't have time. I won't go through them all. You know, swimming Sherman tanks. One of my favorite, the taxable and glitter. The RAF dropped metal strips along the French coast to confuse the German radar. They didn't know what it was. You know, flamethrowers. They had these tanks which laid carpet on the beach because, you know, if you try to bring a tank on the beach, it's going to get caught in the sand. If you try to get a Jeep on the beach, it's going to get caught in the sand. And they also created 2 artificial harbors which were necessary. Now, Operation Fortitude, I like this too. You can read it, you know, as I'm talking, but it was a deception plan. And the invasion relied on innovation, deception, and code breaking. That's what the 3 things that made it succeed. So this camp was built on the coast of Great Britain, and you know, it was an imaginary imaginary military force in Dover with General George S. Patton in charge and visited by King George IV. And the German military was convinced Patton would be the leader because he was the most aggressive general. They had fake radio equipment, decoy equipment, fake paratroopers. They brought in secretaries from the surrounding towns, put them in military uniforms, and had them march around. They had these fake tanks pulled by jeeps around the area in order to show the German surveillance that this was happening. So they were sure this was the base they needed to watch and that they were on their way to Calais to invade. That just gives you a show of what, I mean, that's the tank. It was made out of canvas and some balsa wood. The 4 men are picking it up, and these are the paratroopers who are training. It was incredible. Now, the code breaking, I have to spend a little bit on that because it also is an incredible story. And, you know, maybe you've seen the film with Benedict Cumberbatch about it. You know, the British mathematician and scientist Alan Turing, he was a Cambridge University graduate, but he also did postgraduate work at Princeton University. He was very familiar with America and spent a lot of time in America advising the American military. And he developed the code-breaking equipment, along with others, to break German and Japanese codes, such as the Enigma code. The Enigma code was a cipher machine for sending secret messages used by German top commanders and Hitler himself. The Enigma settings offered, I can't even pronounce it, possible solutions, yet these analysts were able to crack that code. By the end of the war, 9,000, including 7,500 women who were not always involved in the war effort, involved in top secrecy in these these huts on a 50-acre ground. And their job was to supply code-breaking encrypted messages from Germany and Japanese and Italian all over the world. Bletchley Park was the birthplace of modern digital computing. That's where it all began. And, you know, so when you look at your Apple computer, this is where this began. This is a view of Bletchley Park, and that's actually Alan Turing up there, you know, in there, and they're intercepting messages. Now, when I did this at the Custom House, there was an English fellow, and his family was from right around Bletchley Park, and his mother was the post office woman, and she delivered mail to the area, and she delivered mail to Bletchley Park. And she knew that, like, the British government had something there, but she had absolutely no idea that there was code breaking or an espionage organization there. That's how tight the security was, even though there were 9,000 people working there. She had no idea. And this is a view of this is the early computing machine which they put together in order to break these codes. It's imagine how elaborate this is. It's really incredible. And this is actually the machine which they finally created, which deciphered the Enigma code from the top commanders and some from Hitler himself. Again, incredible stuff. So these are the people who did it. Alan Turing, absolutely brilliant mathematician. I can't go into his story. He advised the Americans too. He had a very tragic story after the World War II. I'd invite you to read about it. It's very tragic. He died in 1954. Joan Clark was also a brilliant mathematician and cipherist, and they elected her to be put in charge of one of the huts with one aspect of the code breaking, but they said, we can't have a woman in charge. We can't have it. We have to put a man in charge. We'll put her in second in charge. Well, she ran that hut. The guy on the top was just a figurehead. She ran it. She had to be paid less than the guy at the top as well, which is, again, incredible part of the sign of the times, isn't it? And she went on to do amazing things after the war and died in 1996. Now, Gordon Welchman was a British mathematician and a designer of military communication systems. That's a picture of him when he was young. Does he look familiar to anybody? Yeah? That's right. So, after the war, his first wife was American. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1950s. He taught at MIT, and he advised, as an advisor to the U.S. military communication and espionage systems and a bunch of manufacturers. In 1971, he decided to retire. Where did he decide to retire to? Newburyport, Massachusetts. He moved here and bought a townhouse on Water Street, 176 Water Street, right in front of the water treatment plant. And if you go by that house, you'll see there's a little plaque about this big which says, Gordon Welchman lived here. Incredible, huh? Wow, so you slept in the house. Incredible. Incredible, the cross connections and checks and all this in it, isn't it? It's amazing.
He also looks like a movie star. I mean, if you look at, really, he's quite handsome John.
Yeah, well, he is.
Brilliant.
He had 3 wives and a lot of girlfriends. All right, well, we'll talk a little more at the end. So let me go back. So this is what Europe looked like in April of 1944. You can see the Soviets made incredible inroads. They lost North Africa. They retained this area. You know, the Soviet Union, Stalin, I mean, if you've read anything about the Ukraine, you know how they conduct war. They just threw troops, any young man or old man, they just threw them in. It was the meat grinder approach, which they're still using in the Ukraine. I read one story where, in Stalingrad, when they were coming, they had troops, and they'd send troops out and the troops would say, "We don't have guns." And they said, "That's all right. Go ahead. When the one gets shot in front of you, pick up his gun and shoot him. And if you don't do that, we'll shoot you." That's how the Russians conducted the war. Well, they had so many people, they made incredible inroads in there. So Germany was under pressure and fortified the Western Front because they could not tolerate a Western Front. They knew that would be too much to keep the Eastern Front going against the Russians and here. So they've put a lot of new fortifications on that line that I showed you earlier. Now, that's where they decided to have the Normandy invasion, right here in this piece of land, because it was a broad beach. It was down from Le Havre, which was a deep water port. They felt like it wouldn't be recognized. It was fairly, hidden by this, although there was a peninsula out there, which they had surveillance on. This is where my father was, up above. He said they had no idea what was going to happen. They didn't know when. They knew it would be coming. He was assigned to an LCT, a landing craft number 457, one of the larger ones. And the crews on those were all doubled up from 11 to 15 because they figured at least 2 to 4 people are going to get killed. So, here's the fact sheet. D-Day operation brought together Operation Overload. There were five beaches: Utah, U.S., Omaha, U.S., Gold, Great Britain, Juneau, Canada, and Sword, Great Britain. 160 Allied troops landed, made up of those forces and 12 other Allied nations. Approximately 23,400 Allied troops jumped into Normandy from aircraft and gliders. Those are paratroopers. And over 7,000 naval vessels, 4,000 landing crafts, 12,000 warships, a total of 12,000 aircraft. Massive, massive undertaking. What I look at is how was this coordinated? And that takes me back to Eisenhower and how he found a way. I mean, he had brilliant generals, there's no question about that, but coordinating those brilliant generals and coordinating the personalities and thoughts and disagreements and all that, Eisenhower did all of that. There he is, in fact. This is the day before the paratroopers were to go and landed on June 5th. He went out and talked to them. You can see that the paratroopers carried between 60 and 110 pounds of equipment. Guns, explosives, all kinds of things, which was, you'll hear in a moment, helped to create a high level of casualty for them. But what I want to point out for Eisenhower is, here he is visiting the troops, right, the day before. In his pocket, right there, he wrote out a letter of resignation. If this invasion fails, I take full responsibility for the failure and the loss of life. I hereby resign as general, and I resign as the military. God help me for the loss of life. Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he was going to turn it in the next day if it didn't work. Incredible. Well, fortunately, he didn't have to. But unfortunately, there was a lot of loss of life, almost 50% of the paratroopers. One of the chief reasons was behind enemy lines and behind the beaches, there were fields, and a lot of the fields were below level, and the French had drained them, and they were using them to grow crops and other kinds of things. But the Germans flooded them, the troops within the towns. As soon as they saw them coming, they were called the barrage. And you know, coming in with 100 pounds of equipment. Many of them drowned. Many were caught up in the trees which surrounded the fields and were killed, stuck, their paratroop, parachutes, thank you, caught in the trees, and they were just left hanging there. So it was a very, very sad and tragic kind of thing. Okay. So, Omaha Beach. This is one of the, photographs from Robert Capra. You can see the barriers, on the beach and what they had to cope with. So this is the first task on Omaha Beach was to take out Pont du Lac. And Pont du Lac is this peninsula coming out on the edge here, because it was very, very heavily fortified to be able to shoot anything coming this way and anything coming this way and destroy it. The fighters tried to take all of it out, but were unable to. There was a lot of difficulty coordinating the Air Force, getting them in and bombing, and making sure that they didn't kill American troops coming in the meantime. So the U.S. Rangers, which was an elite group, specially trained, was tasked with going in first and going up that hill. Many of them didn't make it to the hill, but the ones that did actually used, ladders and ropes and found their way up and used explosives to try to take out the nests and the barricades that the Germans had established up there. They weren't able to take out all, but they did significantly take out. And this is kind of the view of what it was like on Omaha Beach. I mean, you can see the cliffs along the side. So again, it was heavily fortified by the Germans. So, I mean, I don't have to tell you, you probably know the story, that people were killed coming out of the boats. People were killed on their way to the shore. The loss of life was tremendous. The highest on any of the 5 beaches was at Omaha Beach. Particularly for the first wave, a little less with the second wave, a little less with the third wave. But again, just ordinary heroes coming in and doing this. And this gives you an idea of what the beach looked like, the fortifications which the Germans had put up, logs and hedgehogs and concertina wire. There also was mines throughout all of the beach area here, and many of the men were killed by the mines, stepping on them unawares. But through this, they made it up, and they made it up to these bunkers. And again, you see the loss. It's incredibly sad to see it all. The mines, an interesting side story, which I just read recently, was that the Army was segregated at this time. So African Americans were in one section. They were not allowed to be with the white forces. And they were not in the advanced troops. They were not allowed to fight in the advanced troops. But one of their tasks were unloading and loading equipment and those kinds of things. But one of their tasks was also to deactivate the mines on the beaches of Normandy. on Utah and Omaha. And many were killed in the process, but they became quite skillful at also finding them and deactivating them. That's a little side note to the history. So, Utah Beach. This is where my father was on Utah Beach, right at the corner of Omaha. So here they are. Omaha's much flatter, as you can see. So the loss of life was much greater, and the Air Force was much, much more effective at taking out all of the armaments which the Germans had established there. So it was a much safer. People were killed, but a much, much lower water life. I want to point out this guy with the cane, right? He's partially crippled. He's got a heart condition, and he was one of the first people off the boat. And he started organizing everybody. He's a general, and he organized everybody and told everybody what to do. His name was Theodore Roosevelt Jr. He's the son of Theodore Roosevelt. He was just an incredible fighter, and his line was, well, here we are. We're starting the war right from here. Incredible. And this is, again, another rapid photo of all the ships. And you can see how massive, like, just the quickness of going in the beach, dropping off troops, going out, doing more troops in, the speed at which they worked. And again, another kind of view of, they had established the beachhead by this point. All of this happened at about 6 o'clock in the morning. That's when they came. And this is a boat very similar to the one my father was on. They built an artificial harbor out to the beach because you had to have an artificial harbor to get something as heavy as this onto the beach. And then you had to have a carpet to get it up and all that. So the maneuvering was really incredible. So, that's the kind of boat my father was on, and there he is, with a lot of curly hair. I never remember him having curly hair, but he did. And I'll read you a little bit of what he said. We first transported Caterpillar DH tractors. They were manufactured during the war, and we were assigned to Utah Beach, which was lucky, because the precision bombing was much more effective than Omaha. We were 24 hours and 18 minutes late for the invasion. IH hour was 8 a.m. We lost an anchor in a collision with a Navy tug as we went out. We were due to come in at 10:08. We unloaded by 10:05. After we unloaded on our first run, we were hit 3 times by German 88 millimeter anti-tank gun. It hit directly on the sailors' quarters and directly hit my locker. I was below deck at the time. Someone in the church steeple at St. Mary Glace was directing fire. We knew the priest was a collaborator with the Nazis. I'll tell you a little more about that. We thought we were dead. The ship was crippled. The controls for the rudders were disabled. And my crew kept the engine running as best we could. We worked on it constantly. I was in charge of the men below deck, and Bob was the captain in charge of above deck. Bob said to me, "We're done for. We're not going to make it." I said, my father, ever the optimist, "Keep going. I'm going to keep the engine running." With the tides, somehow we made it out of range. I don't know how, and were towed back to the main ship. No one died on our boat. One person was severely injured, cut up by shrapnel, the ship's medic. They were hit by German 88 guns, which were greatly feared by the Allies. They were incredible technology. They had a range of 9.2 miles. So it was possible that they were shot from the church steeple in that town closest to. The Allies had nothing like it. So that was what he saw. And that was Saint-Mère d'Église. I know some people went there recently and saw it, and I talked to someone afterwards at the custom house and said, my father said, the priest was probably a collaborator, and he said, my family was French. He said, if you lived on the villages, if you didn't go along with what the Nazis said, you were dead. That's what collaboration was. They didn't support the Nazis. They just didn't want to be killed right on the spot. So that's what happened, and here you see them taking out more gunners within that. So I'll just tell you a little bit the day after D-Day, what my father said, and this is difficult. After they were bringing in equipment and bringing in troops, they were taking out injured men, and he said, we saw a lot of horrible things. There were dead men lined up on the beach, along with the injured and wounded. Some were missing limbs, a few were missing heads. We saw a lot of activity on Omaha in the distance, carrying supplies and taking the wounded out. There were a lot of soldiers lined up, and there were still some in the water. The water was red in parts. I saw a paratrooper still hanging from the telephone pole behind the beach. What the Germans had done was taken some of the paratroopers, and they had, I won't go into the details, but they had mutilated their bodies, and they'd hung them up on telephone poles as a warning not to go into the town or proceed anymore. It was pretty awful. And after that, he spent the next 2 months bringing supplies and equipment to the harbor as they established this. Now, one of the questions is, what were the Germans doing during this time, right? Okay, so here are the commanders. Rommel, he was in charge of Army Group B. He had been demoted. Hitler was mad at him because he had lost North Africa. So he was demoted to one army under Rundstedt, who was the commander-in-chief of all the armies in the West, the Army Group A and B. General Dolman was commander of the 7th. All of his troops were off doing training and defending Calais, so they weren't even in the area. So Rundstedt got a message at 3 a.m. in the morning from some of the men on the coast saying, we're seeing an unusual amount of activity going on in the English Channel. We don't know what it is. We just wanted to let you know. He said, keep me informed. 4 o'clock, they called back and said, there are ships going to the east, but then they're stopping and going south, and they're going to the beaches near us. So Rundstedt had to decide what's going on. At first, everyone thought it was a diversionary tactic, that this was a way to divert troops, because they were really going into Calais. That's what they thought, and that was the firm thing. But as the ships got closer and he began to get reports of them getting closer and closer, he said, no, something else is going on. So he called Hitler at Berchtesgaden and asked to speak to him. The commander-in-chief at Berchtesgaden said, I'm sorry, I cannot wake the Fuhrer. He has left strict instructions. He is not to be awoken until 9 o'clock in the morning. He was up late till 10 o'clock talking to Hungarian diplomats. He said, this is an emergency, Rundstedt said. I cannot do it. Rundstedt slammed the phone down. 6 o'clock, he called back. I need to move troops into this area. We're getting tremendous amount of troops coming in through the coast. He said, I'm sorry, I cannot wake the Fuhrer. He has left strict instructions. Incredible story, isn't it? Rundstedt said, I'm going to order the troops there anyway. Now, here's the deal with when you've got a fascist dictator. He's in charge of everything. So he ordered the troops to come. He wanted to surround the area and be there so that he could then push them back into the sea, just like they did at Dunkirk. Hitler got up at 9 o'clock and was told that he had done this and countermanded the order and said, those troops go back. And he ranked out Rundstedt for doing a command without his permission. Rundstedt, at the end of the phone call, hung it up and said, it's reported, the war is over. Incredible story, isn't it? Now, Rommel wanted to bring in troops as well, and he wanted to charge the beaches, because that's the kind of guy he was. Rundstedt said, no, that's not the right way to do it. So the Germans, the rest of the story is that Hitler was meeting with his commanders. Oh, the other part was Rommel. Rommel, on June 5th, drove to Germany because it was his wife's birthday. And they thought that an invasion couldn't possibly happen. The weather's too bad. It's not even a possibility. So he partied with his wife that evening, and then he got the phone call from Rundstedt at 3:30 in the morning. Something's going on. You better get back here. He hopped in his car and drove back from Germany, and there he was. Hitler had said at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, kind of was looking at maps and hearing what everybody had to say, and said, is this an invasion there or not? And with great diplomacy, his strength said, mein Führer, we think it is. Everyone knew it was. Everyone knew it was. But again, they were convinced it was Calais, and that deep water port, they had no idea that it could even be possible on a beach. So within 24 to 48 hours, this is what it looked like. I mean, they were there, and incredible numbers and force. So again, here's the fact sheet just to tell you what happened. By the end of D-Day, the Allies suffered, 10,300 total casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. Total of Americans killed and Americans wounded. In the ensuing battle, total Allied forces, 73 killed, 153. Due to Allied bombings of French villages and cities in support of that, a very sad story, about 20,000 French civilians were killed. And a total of approximately 23,000 German soldiers were killed, 67 wounded, and 200,000. So great defeat. These are some photos, I'll just show them quickly, which my father, I don't think he took them, but someone on his boat took. So they're amateur photos. And it shows people who they thought were considered collaborators or supporters of the Nazis rounded up on the beach, and some POWs. And I also wanted to kind of show the faces of this is his commander here. And these are just these regular guys, who are on this boat and doing their duty. Just regular guys, like anybody we'd see in Market Basket, It's incredible. And these are the bunkers where they slept at night. Again, the guys, cleaning the deck, ship. This is these past the sensor on the back, so they could send them back to relatives and take them out. So, the timeline. troops made it to Paris. So in August 1944, it was pretty much a celebration. My father and his friend Bob hitched a ride, got some time off after a couple of months, and they went to Paris. I asked him what they did there, and he said, "It was quite a time. It was quite a time." He didn't offer any more details to me. My daughter was watching a movie once, and maybe you've seen the picture of the Moulin Rouge. You know, they have the windmill on it. And he said, "Oh, look, there's a Moulin Rouge." And he said, "Yep, I was there." So this is the timeline of the end of the war. The invasion, the Battle of the Bulge, you know, just one of the bloodiest conflicts that ever occurred, the third deadliest campaign in American history. Happened in December. In April 30th, Hitler commits suicide. May 7th, 1945, Germany unconditionally surrenders. VE Day, that's the celebration in Times Square and all over the US, right? Incredible time of exuberance and all, just amazing. So the demobilization of troops, in response, there was intense public pressure. Families wanted their boys back. They wanted them back home, those who had survived. And the government had concerns over the budget, so they demobilized or discharged the armed forces as quickly as possible, and it began in May. By the end of 1945, had returned more than 4 million soldiers. Between September and December, they did an average of 1.2 million per year back to the US. Incredible. The Navy and the Marine Corps postponed demobilization discharge until the defeat of Japan. This is what it looked like. That's the Queen Mary. That's, I mean, incredible, isn't it? I mean, they wanted home. Anybody who could squeeze onto that boat squeezed on that boat. Just incredible. The journey home. And that's my father's childhood home. His grandfather built it in Fairfield, Connecticut, and he returned home. So I'm almost done, but I wanted to tell you this story. After he returned home, when I saw this, I said, "This is incredible. I just can't believe that you went through this and that you survived. Because if you hadn't survived, I wouldn't be standing here, and my grandchildren wouldn't be alive. It's an amazing story." I said, I guess it was just luck that your boat wasn't hit again and you were all killed. And he just looked at me. He was a quiet guy. He said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, I was lucky, 2 times lucky." 2 times, I said? What was the second time? And then he told me the story. He was home for 30 days. He thought he was going to be discharged. He went back to his boss at Burroughs and said, "Can I have my job back?" He said, "Yes, yeah. As soon as you're discharged, come see me. You'll be back." He waited. He got a letter. I'll read to you. After a 30-day leave, I got a letter and was called up to report to a base in Texas to prepare for the invasion of Japan. We all knew it might be coming, but we weren't sure when or if we'd be involved. After being there for a while, the company commander came to speak to us. He told us our skills and experience in the invasion of Normandy were needed for the invasion of Japan. He also said, and I quote what my father said, "I have to be truthful with you boys. Half of you will not make it home. We know the Japanese will fight to the last man. So write letters to your loved ones and get ready. And he did. He wrote to his mother. We spent the next 60 days training and preparing for warfare on the Japanese beaches. This is what the Japanese forces looked like. A very strong navy, very strong and committed force. Here's Hirohito, Prime Minister. This was the area of the Asia that they controlled in 41 and 42. But the tide had turned. In 1945, at the beginning of the war, they had the best army, navy, and air force in the Far East, considered one of the most powerful and technologically advanced. But by spring of 1945, Japan was in a desperate situation. Due to the military successes, invasions of all the islands, devastating air raids, submarine campaigns, severe shortages of fuel supplies and food for the general public. The Soviet Union refused to renew its neutrality pact. American forces planned for an invasion of Japan for November 1945, Operation Olympic. Although General Douglas MacArthur and other military leaders acknowledged it would result in large, even disastrous numbers of military and civilian casualties over a prolonged period of time. The Potsdam Conference. Stalin's looking a little more optimistic. Truman, Churchill, Stalin. The Potsdam Declaration demanded Japan's unconditional surrender or faced prompt and utter destruction. On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. VE Day, General MacArthur accepts the unconditional. My father said, our group commander came in and said, "Go home, boys, the war is over." And he did. Again, in honor to my father and in honor to all the other ordinary heroes who are here with us in spirit. Our gratitude to all the brave men and women who served in World War II, and our continuing thanks to all who serve our country and continue to keep us safe. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. If there are any questions, we can chat afterwards. I'll stay around, I promise. If there are any questions, I can answer them now. Yeah, go ahead.
Everybody knows what D-Day is, and I've been debating what the D stands for. Is that disembarkation, or what is the D in D-Day?
Oh, that's a really good question. What does the D in D-Day stand for? I don't know. No, it's not a stupid question. I don't know. Now I have to go home and look it up. Do you know?
Each invasion had a letter code.
Yes.
That was the fifth major invasion.
Oh, so it was the fifth major invasion. So it was called fourth. So called D-Day. Okay. I can tell you one other, that's interesting that was done for the fourth letter, D-Day. The other one I found out about Utah and Omaha Beach, like why did they call it Omaha and Utah Beach? Well, one of the generals, I think it was Bradley, somebody came in to his office he hadn't seen before, and he said, "Oh, I'm new. I'm just coming in, sir. Where are you from? Blah, 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 blah." He said, "Oh, I'm from Utah." And he said, "Okay, we'll call this Utah Beach." The next day, somebody came in he hadn't seen before, and they said, "Where are you from?" He said, Omaha. Okay, Omaha Beach. That's how they were named. Incredible. Well, thank you very much, and I'll hang around and, thank you again.